And we're live. Welcome back to another Corona Geek here where we talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. I'm your host, Charles McKeever, and we're joined today by a bunch of hooligans.
Bring it on the soccer!
I'm just going to get it right down to it. We're just got a bunch of hooligans on the panel here today, and we're going to talk about Apple rejecting your apps if they have a rewards in them, or if you kind of ask people for things. We're going to talk about LiquidFun. We're going to talk about Swift, and we're going to talk about some of the announcements that came out of WWDC. So thank you guys for joining us here. What's going on? What's going on out there in the wide world of everything? You guys got any announcements you want to talk about? Anything before we get started?
Sure. I've got an announcement.
Go ahead.
My game was approved by Apple. C-Blurp is now available on Apple, Amazon, and Google Play. So it's a free game, casual, just relaxing, non-stressful, capture the fish, crab, and turtle, and good world.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I went out and pulled it off of Google Play, and that was a lot of fun. It was
deceptively. It seems easy. It's not as easy as once you get up to the higher levels.
That's exactly what I was going to say, because the premise is to get the fish or to get the whatever into the box, into the little treasure chest, and at first I was like, well, this seems fairly easy, maybe like a kid's game, and I'll play it a little bit. And then I got to the second level and the third level, and pretty soon I was like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, there's multiple things that I have to manage on the screen. Okay, it's getting kind of stressful.
Can you post a link in the chat on the show notes?
Sure, I'll be happy to.
Well, awesome, great. And you said you got it out on all the different stores?
Yeah, everything but Samsung, and I'm working on getting that into their store this week.
Okay.
Yeah. Can we have a quick question about Samsung store? Because I've never managed to get an app approved by Samsung.
Oh, really? I've not tried to. This will be my first app to attempt to approve.
Yeah.
In some ways, they are a lot more stringent than Google or Amazon. In other ways, it's it's more like Google Play. So they seem to be a cross section there.
Yeah, it seems just so weird, because all the other stores they approve the apps no problem, and then Samsung just comes back, rejects constantly, and they don't give you any feedback. So if you get it into the Samsung store, it might be an idea to have a chat on that on another Corona Geek.
Yeah,
possibly.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people have had the same kind of feedback, that it's kind of a pain. But if
but they're giving 80% if it's a paid app, of course.
Yeah,
my app's free, so it doesn't apply.
It might be worth the effort, at least if nothing else, from just an exposure standpoint. One more place to be.
I have an announcement.
Yeah, go for it. It's been a while since you were here. I'm glad you're back.
Yeah, I've been extremely busy, but I'm very excited to announce today we've launched our new crowdfunding project to finish one of our games. So if you get a chance, check out the website, welcofundingportal.com. You'll see our new crowdfunding project to finish up our game called Blue Groove Racer. So really excited about that.
Oh, very cool. Awesome. Yeah, definitely go check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes. Anything else? Yeah. No? Okay. Let's move on then here to a couple of announcements. If you didn't have a chance to watch Corona Geek number 92, definitely go check that out. We talked all about creating art for your apps. Greg Pugh walked us through and talked about just a whole toolbox worth of tools. He showed us everything from free tools up to several $1,000s worth of tools, which was it was kind of interesting that he had all those things installed and ready to go on his computer. It was amazing. And he was able to bring them all up and talk about each of them. So if you didn't have a chance to check that out, go do so. Also, one of the things that we didn't recommend or mention in that show that I meant to talk about was some resources where you could get stock images and things like that. So Photolia is one of them, and I actually came across a site called Vector.me, which has a lot of vector art and things like that, and it was it's one of these situations where you credit the artist and you're able to use these things for your work. So I'll put a link to both of those in the show note. They're great resources, and I use them for a variety of different projects all the time. So also Harmony 2 is coming out. Actually, it's June 2nd. It did come out, and it's hit the number 3 spot in iTunes, which I thought was great. Did you guys play Harmony, the original? It's basically just like it sounds. Harmony. It's a very calming type game. Harmony 2 has music. It's a puzzle game. It's got tons of levels, and Harmony 2 actually has 2 hours of music. So it's really designed to. I guess maybe if you're on a plane and you're just wanting to chill, or you're sitting by the pool, or whatever. It's a great way to do that. And Borderleap, the developers of that, they're very good about minimalistic design, and they like colors and things like that. So it's very, there's not a lot of stuff to get in the way. So if you get a chance, go check that out, Harmony 2, and help them push them further in the number 2, number 3, or 1 spot, because you can leave a review and tell them what you think about the app, things like that.
Cool.
Also recommended by Jen Looper, who's not with us today, but is an excellent contributor to the show. She sent a message across about Code for America 2015. So if you're into that kind of thing, you want to do maybe some government work or some work on some projects that help city, state government sort of thing, then you can apply by July 16th, 2014. And if you are chosen, then they'll actually pay you $50,000 while you're participating. So I thought that was pretty good. So you get to be involved in something that's potentially socially beneficial and make a decent salary, and also have a great experience. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. All right, so let's talk about this other thing that's going on here. The thing that I just came across a link for on TechCrunch, that Apple's beginning to reject apps that offer rewards. I don't know if you guys saw this. We were talking about it a little bit before the show started, and it seemed like Apple gave us some great announcements a week ago, and then today they're like, give us and take it away.
Stuff away. There's lots of neat toys, and we're going to take it away.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually read that same article, Charles, and I thought it was very interesting that is the approach, though it does make sense with the ecosystem that they've had from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, Apple's making their money on this, not from the developer $99 a year fee, but from their 30% that they're taking. And
yeah.
So anything that's going to cut into that 30%, they're going to not be happy about.
Yeah, and just for anybody who doesn't know exactly what we're talking about, if I'll put a link in the show notes, and if you go and look at the TechCrunch article, they actually give some examples of basically like having a dialog box that comes up that says, hey, you want to watch a sponsored video and earn 100 coins. So yeah, you're absolutely right. This is kind of cutting into the real world dollars of Apple, right? If I can get you to unlock levels, and I can earn basically through arbitrage, I can earn money off of that, then I'm effectively cutting Apple out of the ecosystem there to some degree. And it also kind of is, maybe a poor user experience. What do you guys think?
I think it's yet another way to reduce developers' income.
Okay. Yeah, you think that that's they should provide more opportunities that.
Well, that's the whole reason those places like that came about, is because the whole race to the bottom to begin with, until they make a way where you can get your app discovered, which I know they talked about at the dev conference, right? But until they actually do all of that and make a way for developers to get their app discovered, especially if it's not a free app, right? They need to leave stuff like that alone. That's my personal opinion, but they don't listen to me, of course. So.
Well, yeah, we're going to talk about that a little later on some of the things they noted. But I think that since you've kind of mentioned it, I think that one of their the ability to bundle all the apps. I don't know if you guys saw, but they said that you can bundle up to 10 apps, but you're doing that at a discount. So you can bundle 10 apps together. Your discount is, let's say, $8 and something, right? Maybe it's $7.99 or something like that. It becomes your new price. I think that effectively what they're doing is incrementally raising customers' expectations as to what an app costs. Right, because if I get 10 apps for, let's just say, I don't know what the actual math is, but let's just say for $7.99, there's a kind of an overwhelming value proposition there that as a consumer says, oh, well, I get 10 apps, and now I become accustomed to paying more than 99 cents. Hopefully, at some point, they can raise the bar and say developers can charge, $8 for their app, one app.
Yeah, the problem with that, however, is if you look at the top 25 grossing apps, they're all free.
Yeah.
Actually, probably closer to top 50 now, but yeah.
So you're saying that the freemium will still continue to win out even if they are able to raise the bar?
Sure.
Good point. Okay. Well, good point. Yeah. Well, I don't think that, and we were talking about this earlier, is I don't think that Apple's going to come in and the announcement's going to seem very heavy-handed, and people are going to scramble to figure out exactly what that means. And I think you had mentioned about cut the rope and things like that. Yeah. Being dependent on these types of premium tactics. But I think it's just like when we saw all the in-app app stores. They kind of eliminated those types of things and cleaned up that space. And I don't think it's going to affect people the way they think it will, but yeah, I agree. It will cut people's revenue in different ways. All right, so I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You guys go take a look at it. And also, one of the other things that I wanted to announce was that Sergey Lerg, also a Corona ambassador and show regular, is going to be organizing a Moscow meetup for Corona devs. And he's actually presenting at the developers conference in Moscow with a talk on Go and Google App Engine. I don't know if you guys ever saw that Corona Geek episode, but he walked us through an application where he had a Corona app, he had a Go app, and he was making the two talk to each other. And so he's presenting that in Moscow. And then he's also on June 15th on a Sunday. He is going to do a meetup, so I will put a link to that in the show notes. And if you guys happen to be in the area, you might want to go to
Moscow area.
Yeah. So, but
hey, there are a lot of great developers over there in Moscow. I've got a lot of friends that are of the Russian persuasion, and they're great app developers. So I'm sure that I don't know how big of our audience we have in Moscow, but. It is something that I would, if I were there, I would definitely attend.
Yeah, I mean, if I had that many frequent flyer miles, I would definitely go. Sergey's, he does some good talks, and I like his work. So, yeah, I'll definitely put a link in the show notes. You can go to that if you're in the area for sure. All right, let's talk about LiquidFun. Okay, how many? Raise a hand. How many people are keeping track of LiquidFun? Mm-hmm.
It looks fascinating, but I haven't had a chance to play with it, so I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say about it.
Okay. Well, it's basically if you're not familiar with what it is, basically it's Google has come out with this open source fluid bodies. So imagine with Box 2D you have rigid bodies, squares and rectangles and things like that. And what Google's come up with is with LiquidFun is basically fluid bodies. So things that you can make like water or smoke or things like that. And that's different than like a particle that you might think of in like a traditional particle system. But they do use what they call particles. So let me just flip over. I have some notes here. So they have things like so they're basically pushing together rigid bodies and fluid bodies together. So in LiquidFun, you actually have Box 2D and this fluid body ability kind of smashed together. And we'll put a link in the show notes so that you can go check it out. But it's like I said, it's open source. It's written in C++, and it does a lot of things. It does like it allows for buoyancy. It allows for color mixing. It also does things like I said, you can do water. You can do different particles, and the particles are actually they're round. So you have like almost like if you just think of it as almost like a molecule or like a drop of water. So it's round, and it's all you can put all these particles together, and then you can make this fluid mass off of it. And so anyway, Corona has taken an integrated LiquidFun into Corona SDK. So basically now you can do rigid bodies and you can do fluid bodies. So
and this is in our daily builds?
Yeah, so as of daily build 2322, Corona Pro and Enterprise users, they can begin to implement LiquidFun physics into their apps. And it's like I said, that allows you to do faucets and pools, waves and streams, any kind of thing like that. And so like if you've seen like Where's My Water, you know, where the little alligator kind of controls the flow of water, or you control the flow of water rather, to get the water to the alligator in the bathtub. Those types of things are possible. And we're also going to look at some examples, some demos here in just a second. But the liquids are represented by, like I said, like a particle system. Each of the particles are round. It's not related to the emitter-based particles that we've seen in the past. Those are created with the emitter particles are created with display.new emitter, and these particles for LiquidFun are created with physics.new particle system. So you actually create, so you have like the physics engine, then you create a particle system, and then out of that you create a particle, and then you give it properties and do things to it, and then you iterate through to create multiple particles all together, and we'll look at that in just a second. But there's a tutorial out on the Corona Labs website, which I will link to, and it's an introduction to LiquidFun. And one thing of note is that because LiquidFun is a Google-supported thing, it's out on their GitHub repository. We didn't duplicate any of their documentation. So if you go into our documentation, you'll see that we show you how to use it with Corona. But if there's things that you want to know or understand about LiquidFun, then you just hop out to the Google documentation and look it all up there. So let's look at a couple examples here. Let me flip back over here.
Well, and while you're pulling that up, since it's done in C++ through Google and made open source, and it's being added as a plug-in into Corona, is it plug-in or a built-in?
It's a built-in.
It's a built-in.
Yeah,
So we've got it available for whether we're doing iOS or Android development.
Right. Yes. Thank you. That's always a kind of an assumed, but yes, definitely worth pointing out that here you are going for, because I actually looked at there was a demo by Google at GDC, and they talked all about how you could build for Android, and of course at the time they opened up Xcode and did some development in there, but they were so it's kind of funny because they were like, okay, here's Xcode, and then they were like, oh, and you can use this library to do Android. So here again, just like always, you come do your code in Lua, tap into all of that, and then you're able to publish out for the different platforms without having to rewrite the app. So very cool. All right, let's see here. Okay, we'll look at a couple of the other examples in just a moment, but I want to walk through this color faucet example. I guess you guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so inside the sample code, there's 4 or 5 different sample code demos that you can look at that show you how to get started with LiquidFun. Now, the frame rates are going to be a little bit off because we're out here on Google Hangouts, which is always the case. But basically, what you're seeing here on the right-hand side here is that the demo's generated a particle, a round one singular particle, and then it's replicating that over and over again to create sort of this fluid effect here. And if you tap on the screen, I don't know if you guys can see that on the,
Yes.
but there's like a box that shows up, and so that box is basically wherever you've touched, and then you can drag that box around, and then if the fluid or the particles interact with the box, then they get pushed around, and you can almost see the little individual particles separate. And so there's two different streams here, and we've just set the color differently on the two. And then one of the things that you can do with LiquidFun is there's what they call color mixing. So you can see that there's a blue and there's a red, but if you kind of swirl everything around, you get a purple. So it's kind of fun. So let's look at some of the code for that. So basically over here on the left-hand side, I've got, I'll bump that up another notch or two, but I've got what we're all familiar with seeing. We've got our physics engine. We start that up. We can set our draw mode, and that's actually included in the demo just so that you can kind of play with it. So if you put it in hybrid, spell it right, then you get the same thing. And I'm actually going to bump that up just a little bit. Did I not spell hybrid right? Hybrid.
Yep.
Did I save?
You have hybrid.
Oh, hybrid. Hybrid. Yeah.
It's not a technical monster.
Yeah. I need spell. See, that's what I need a spell check for Sublime. So.
Okay,
so
Sublime makers, that's a tip.
Yeah. Well, that's yeah. There you go. I don't know if that would help me, but it would be cool. So here are all the particles. And in hybrid mode, you can actually see kind of all the particles coming out of there. And one of the interesting things, I don't know if you can tell it or not on this display there, but there's actually a couple of different radiuses going on. There's the particle radius itself, which is just the individual ball, and then good, lost connection on my mouse. And then it's been warning me for hours that my mouse was going to run out. And then there's the radius of like an outer radius, or that you can extend so that you can actually make the fluids look more cohesive. So they have not just these individual dots, but they're more of a all congealed together and stuff like that. Well, that's kind of stinks. Okay, I'm going to reach over here. You guys can't see me anyway. Good. Okay, so I'm going to reach over here and grab my trackpad. So let's go back to normal. Save. And I will actually take it down a notch here because it's really, really big. Wake up!
Yeah, cheers. It's been a long day.
I know it. I'm just messing with you. Okay, and so our status bars are gone. We got rid of our status bar. We set a default fill color, which basically affects this platform down here that everything's flowing into. And then we're coming in and we're actually creating a couple of things just as a container, just to just create that reservoir that we can get our fluid objects, our particles into, and all that's pretty much as expected. There's a section here on debugging, which we'll look at in just a moment, and then we're creating some forward references. So basically, we've got things like in this example, we've got velocity, so you can control most of your normal properties that you have on a particle, so or a physics object. So you can do like velocity, you can set the x and the y of it, you can and do most of the things you would expect to do. But with a particle in fluid LiquidFun, you don't have rotation. So I think that was like one of the few things that is different than what you would normally expect with physics objects. So anyway, setting some of those. We'll talk about those in a moment. You've got an on touch, which is basically handling whenever we touch the screen, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. We're creating our particle system, which I've actually kind of collapsed some of these things, but we'll talk about those in just a moment. But basically, you create your particle system, you set some parameters for it, and then because like I said, you've created one particle, you want that particle to be replicated over and over again, so you put it into a timer. And so here we've created a little function called onTimer, which we call perform with delay. which we're actually calling it fairly quickly here over and over again so that we get that waterfall effect. Then we're also throwing in an inner frame listener, and that's basically just for what did we do here? We were doing some this is where we're actually going in and grabbing some information and sending it back for what's called a query region, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here. And then at the end we're just putting in some instructions. So touch and drag to flick the particles. So we're just some instructions for the user on the screen. So let's go back up here to the top to where we did our particle system. So when we create our particle system, we're basically bringing in this PNG. So particle PNG is like if we looked at it in our project, it's actually see if I can find it here.
And a little tip here: if you go ahead and upgrade to the new the beta of Sublime Text to Sublime Text 3, graphics will show when you click on them. Instead of giving that's a big plus to go ahead and upgrade, and your license is transfers directly to it. So if you've already bought Sublime 2, it directly transfers to 3, and you'll be able to see graphics when you click on them instead of a bunch of binary numbers.
Oh, very cool.
So well worth taking the effort to go ahead and upgrade it.
Right. Yeah. Well, here is the particle. It's you probably can't see it on the screen there. It's very light, but it's
just
right there.
a white dot, isn't it?
It's just a white dot. So it's just it's just a particle.png.
And what size is that? Just out of curiosity.
Let's see.
10 by 10.
Probably
20 by
something
20.
like that. Let's just go here, get info, and we are 32 by 32.
Okay, nice binary.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, for texture memory and all that kind of stuff like that. All right. So, okay. So yeah, you're bringing in then that particle.png, and then from there you're doing your color mixing strength, which I'm not going to get into all of that. Like I said, if you go into the documentation, there's a whole bunch of different concepts that involve with FluidFun or LiquidFun. There's things like there's also things like strength. I saw on the GDC talk from Google, they talked about particles being able to have strength. So if you had a bunch of particles all together, they would have sort of a combined strength, so that if you wanted something to have to like push through them, you could do that and have a resistance to physical forces, things like that. So that's kind of interesting. So, but you can, if you go into the demo, I would recommend just messing with each one of these things to see what they do. At a minimum, you can set the radius of the particle, which I said before, was just the actual PNG itself. So you're setting how big is that ball, and then if you want to do an image radius, you could actually do an image radius that kind of expands out beyond just the physical size of the ball and makes the thing look like it has more cohesives or more cohesion. So if you did like a 1, right? If we change this to a 1 and hit save, then we come up with a bunch of like little individual dots, not like this. A little more like more specks. But if we did like a 10, and I think hopefully this will work, it gets a little more like a goo, like a blob. And that's just because now we don't see those individual particles. We see, just the fluid mass. So you can kind of play with that to get the effect that you want. So let's just go back to where we were. Okay, and then, like I said, now you just created a particle system, so new particle system, and then what we want to do is we want to create some parameters for each of our particles, and we want to say, okay, what do we want it to be? We want it to be water. We want to allow color mixing, and I think there are a bunch of other options that you can set as well. Like I said, there's like apart from water, there's let's see here. I had it on here. It's smoke. There's powder. There's viscous. There's spring, elastic. These are all part of the LiquidFun API. So you can kind of play around with mix and match those things as you want. So you can also set the linear velocity for the X and Y. So like rather than just having things appear, you can have things have more of a natural feel to them. So they kind of accelerate as they go, or they come out from a a particular starting point and things like that. So we've set the color, and to be quite honest, I don't know why we did this here. I don't know why the X is set several times there, but I'm sure it has something to do with the parameters that are passed in. There's a bunch of optional parameters that are passed in, and so here we're setting X equals 0. Then we're coming back around and setting it with a different value and then another value, and I think that's probably just, I would have to go back and research.
Yeah, that's got to be just simply repetitive, because the only value that's going to stick is that last one.
Yeah, but I guess if you think of it from the perspective of passing in the parameters, because here we're saying the parameters are, they mean something. So I didn't have time to go look and see exactly what those three were. Okay.
Well, I'm planning on integrating this into the current textbook that I'm finishing up on the advanced graphics chapter. So I'll dig into this and include some information about that.
Oh, cool. Well, here, let me just while
Fortunately,
we're here.
I haven't finished it, so I can go ahead and add this one more section that will probably add another 50 pages to the book.
Well, here, let me pull over this for just a second. Like I said, if you go to LiquidFun, and again, we'll put links in the show notes, but if you go to their programmer's guide, there's a ton of information here about things that you can do. So you have particle lifetimes, stuck particles. I mean, it just gets, and what you're really looking for if you go here, of course, is that you're looking to try to understand the concepts, right? The code that's here is implemented differently than Corona SDK, but you can kind of come
still
here.
Calling these APIs.
Yeah, exactly. You can still come here to the documentation and go, what is that? What does that parameter do? Oh, okay, I see what that parameter does.
Corona is just, or your Lua Corona is just simply your pass-through to this API that you're calling. So you're still pulling all these pieces in.
Right, exactly. And if you look here on Corona's documentation, we've got kind of a video that shows you what's going on, and then we've got all the parameters here listed as well. Everything that we support is here. So take a look at that as well. But there may be some places where you're like, well, what else is possible? And you might be able to go over to their documentation and pull something out that we didn't. Like again, we didn't replicate their documentation because that wouldn't make any sense. Okay. And also while I'm here, here's the tutorial. Basically, what we're walking through right now on the Corona Labs blog. If you go, there's a tutorial here that will kind of break all of this apart as well, and it does go into explanation about some of the things. Although I didn't see a thing that explained what we were talking about just a moment ago, but it does do things. X's. Yeah, the multiple X's, but it does talk about flags, and then give you a reference to the LiquidFun Programmer's Guide. So let's take that away for a moment. Hold on. Let me grab it. All right, and then we'll go back over here. So that was basically just to create the red one. So now we've set all the parameters for the red, the left side, and then we're going to do the same thing for the blue. And all the information is pretty much very similar. So I'm assuming that what is here with the X is probably optional, because here. It's only set once. Yeah, right. It's only passed in once. So then you wind up with what we've got. So again, one of the things that I would say is go in and and play with them. Yeah, play with the
numbers. See what happens.
Exactly. So there you go. Now you wind up with
experiment.
So now you wind up with a bunch of dots as opposed to more of a gooey liquid sort of thing, and then. Yeah, I mean, this was really what I was doing. I was just like, well, what does this do? Oh, I see what that does. And that seemed like the best way to do it. Which kind of brings up the idea that no matter what you're wanting to do, you're going to wind up having to tweak it anyway. Right. Because none of this stuff is, there's no like, unless you have one, Brian, like a cookbook. of how to make, hey, I want to make something that looks like Jell-O, and here's the cookbook. You might be a product idea there.
Might be something to come up with, yeah.
Is there a limit on how many particles you can have in your scene over there?
I don't know.
You know, that's a lot of particles that are being generated for this. I'd love to throw a counter on that to just see, but we're talking about thousands of particles there, and of course this is running in the simulator, so it's based on the system, not an iPhone or an iPad, but I don't think we would see much of a loss there.
Yes, that's a very good question, and even Google's the GDC talk, they were like, these are all individual particles, and we've gone a long ways to make sure that they're all everything's optimized. So
this is very cool.
Somebody having a fire?
Nope.
I think an alarm's going off in my building, so I'm just going to check that out.
Okay. Okay, so like I said, we're creating these individual particles, but now what we want to do is we want to come back here and we want to actually put them into a timer. So we create a function called onTimer, throw them into a perform with delay, and then we go through and create these particles over and over and over and over again. So we're creating, if we wanted to, we could slow it down.
So basically you're creating new particles, however many are specified inside the parameter for particle param red or blue, into the particle system. So first of all, to back up a little bit, you've created a particle system just like we create a physics system. We turn on physics so that we can have collision. And the particle system works similar to that, but is dependent upon that physics system.
Absolutely.
So we got to turn on physics, and then you turn on your particle system so that you can have your LiquidFun.
Right.
Then we go ahead and set up our parameters, just like we would create a new object for physics that we're going to have collision with. We're going ahead and setting up similar parameters for the particles that we're going to use inside the LiquidFun.
Exactly.
And then we're simply adding it to the engine, just like we would add a body to the physics engine for collision. Here we're adding with a create group the particles that are liquid.
Exactly, and one of the interesting parts here is the create group, because I slowed it down to creating another instance every 1 second, and so now we're looking at balls and diamonds.
Just one particle popping up there per second.
Right.
That definitely slows things down just a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's multiple particles.
Yeah.
All grouped together. So if I change it to 2,000. 2,000. Yeah. Okay. Oh no.
Nope, that's 25,000.
Don't change it. Well, that was actually 2OS. I don't remember what that was. Okay, hold on. Let me relaunch.
Don't tell them what that would do. That'll crash.
That will crash. Yeah. So then you just wind up with again the same particle group, but it's just they're actually released slower.
This is really a great tool. I can see a lot of interesting apps and games being created from this.
It just becomes fun to play with. Like as I was going through the demo here, I was just like, well, what happens if I do this? Oh, that's cool. What if I happen to do this? Oh, that's cool. So it spurs imaginative things as you go. So then there's this inner frame listener. So let's take this back to 100 just so we can, just because it looks cooler. So then we have this inner frame listener here, which gets into query regions, and I actually want to show you a different example that's included in the sample code, and it has to do with these query regions. So let's go down here and open with the recent thing here. So this query region is like when the fluid goes through a region, it has a different interaction. So here everything's a particle, and then when it gets down into here, everything turns into numbers. So then you kind of you're throwing numbers around and.
Oh, interesting.
So you can have different interactions based on different regions, and I thought that was kind of fun too. And then here's another one. Just kind of look at all these just briefly, just to see what they do. This one is called color group, and this one actually has blocks of. So now we're creating different shapes, rectangles and triangles and circles, of groups of particles. and then dropping them from the sky, and then color mixing them together. So now we are almost like blobs or jello. So it's almost like a blob Tetris falling from the sky.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really fun. So there's an example for that. There's an example for destroy, which I thought was really interesting. So you've got, before we had everything kind of bouncing together and things like that. Well, now when we touch the screen, we actually destroy parts of our particles. So we can kind of cut the fluid stream into bits, and we kind of destroy whatever particle we touch, which is kind of, so anything that's even on the ground there, we can kind of destroy it. So if we wanted to create some sort of timed game where our objective is to completely keep something from reaching its destination, we could try to do something like that.
Yeah, cool.
And I think let's see, there's a couple more here. Raycast. Raycast, of course, is part of Corona SDK, but here with LiquidFun, we can say if something has passed a particular point, then we can basically pick up on that and take some sort of action. So here the fluid has crossed the line, so the line turns different colors.
And I love the fact that you're able to push objects with the liquid particles. That like the square slid over to the left as the particles came in, and there was complete interaction between the different physics bodies.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the discussions that we had that they're working on is registering. I'm trying to remember how I say this because I'm probably saying it wrong. It's an engineering thing. They're registering the interaction between rigid bodies and fluid bodies. So basically, right, like you said, right now you can have this interaction where this square is kind of floating in the fluid body, but you want to be able to pick up on that, right? You want to be able to take some sort of action based on that. And so, anyway, we're working.
Is it truly floating there, or is it? Were you holding that up?
No, I wasn't holding it up. It's floating there.
Okay, so it is truly floating. That's very interesting. Based upon the physics of the object, we're able to actually control the environment there.
And see there, when it gets into the fluid is flowing
it's actually
down.
Holding it up.
Yeah, it's actually hitting the corners of the square and causing it to rotate. So yeah, definitely some interesting interactions.
Definitely considering, a few months ago we did a whole show just on buoyancy and different ways to represent buoyancy.
I was thinking about that same thing. Yeah, I was thinking about that same thing, and here it is, all kind of like just just add water. So yeah, here's touch. Just a simple touch example where you're just basically moving the fluid around. So anyway, so there's, like I said, there's several samples. Go in and check those out. Those are lots of fun to play with, and gives you a good understanding of how it works. And then you'll definitely want to go and check out the documentation both on Corona Labs website and on Google's GitHub repo. So definitely check that out.
Cool.
All right, so let's talk about and so that's LiquidFun. So let's talk about Swift. And I think we're probably going to run out of time if we don't move along a little faster. That's
okay. We got another show next week.
Yeah, this is true. All right, so Apple announced Swift on their. Let me go back here. Hold on. I'm sorry. Let me kill my screen share. I just have to find you guys. You're here someplace. Where are you? So Apple announced Swift as a new programming language at WWDC, and I think that's an amazing thing. I think that's an amazing thing on their part. Hold on, where is it? Oh, there I am. I'm back. I think that's an amazing thing on their part, especially when you keep in mind that they have been using Objective-C or some variation thereof
for a very long time. Well,
the past 18 years.
Yeah, it has been the default language.
Yeah, I mean this is
a major shift to recognizing that Objective-C isn't the most friendly language for being able to do app development quickly and efficiently. That was one of the big selling points to me to going to Corona, was when I started doing apps in days or even hours compared to weeks with Objective-C.
Well, yeah, exactly. And so one of the first things that the questions that we got, because I gave a presentation to the iOS meetup group here in Austin, was, what does that mean for something like Corona, where our central tenet is that use less code and do things faster, and Objective-C is kind of complicated and Lua is simple, and things like that. And what it comes down to is that this is a big gamble for Apple. It's a gamble I'm sure they put a lot of thought into, but it's still very much a gamble. It doesn't, while Swift is it's very similar. If you look at Lua and Swift next to each other, it's very similar. I mean, so a lot of the introductory materials about Swift are kind of like, how do you create a variable? How do you create a constant? How do you create loops and things like that? And it looks very similar to Lua in a lot of ways.
Well, and we were talking before the show that at the announcement of Apple, they were saying that this is very Python-like for Swift. And we use at the university I'm at, we use Python as the first intro programming or scripting language for many of our students. C++ for the computer science students, and everybody else is learning Python. When I'm getting students in mobile app development or game development, they're coming in with Python. Generally speaking, this transition to Lua for most of the students is drop the semicolon. This is great. I love this, and it takes them about 15 minutes to make the switch from, even if it's that, then that's the slow students, to make the transition from Python to Lua.
Yeah, that's one of the things they kept saying at the WWDC announcement, was that, and you don't have to use a semicolon.
Right.
Which is funny,
Semicolons.
But it is those types of things. Like, okay, so here's the little backstory for anybody who doesn't know. Objective-C was developed at Next Computer. Okay, so this is like a kind of like a short, very, very short history lesson. Don't glaze over. Apple kicked Steve Jobs out. Steve Jobs went and created Next Computer. They needed an operating system. They needed programming and all that kind of stuff like that. So they created their own programming language, basically, and Objective-C is kind of born out of that. And it's was basically bolted on to C.
Would have been C+ at that time, yeah.
You're right, yeah. So it's
before C++. This is C+.
Right. So it's got a lot of additional things. Like, there's a lot of notation in Objective-C that's there to separate it from what we'll just call the base C, right? So if you want to use some of the language basics for C, you could, but there's also all these additional libraries and all these additional concepts that are in Objective-C that you don't normally have in the language, and so that made it kind of weird, very foreign, definitely Apple specific, and
with a nasty learning curve.
And nasty learning curve, and eventually it made it very hard to read, right? Because you're writing you're like cryptic, dot cryptic dot, and so what they've decided to do is they've decided to try to simplify things, as much as possible, and make it easier to read, write less code, all those types of things. But it doesn't really alleviate you from understanding iOS development, right? There's still a whole API there. There's still all the other stuff that you still have to understand and know. And then if you want to develop on Android or any other platform, you don't get that with Swift, right? It's an Apple-only product. And that's still the advantage of Corona. We can develop for iOS, we can develop for Android very soon. We can put things out there for Fire TV. I'm sure we'll have some compatibility with the new Amazon phone that's being announced later this month, we assume.
and of course Windows is coming as well. So it's being able to write once, publish to this many platforms. The real advantage of this, and this is something that we've all discussed before, is the plugins. If you are an enterprise or a pro user and you're developing plugins, you're going to be able to write these plugins in Swift instead of having to go to Objective-C. And go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what the plans are as far as Swift support and things like that, but I mean, clearly Apple has. I think that they are encouraging developers to use Swift, and there's a lot of things in their documentation where they talk about, well, if you use this API call, it's faster than Objective-C. So there's a lot of encouragement for you to adopt the language and move that direction. So I wouldn't see why that wouldn't be something that eventually, we would even have to support. I don't know. That's just me talking. I don't know what the engineers are thinking, but I don't see why not.
Well, it's Python-like. It's just going to be that much easier.
Right. Yeah. Now, speaking of which, there's some really good articles out there already. Some people are doing some really great work over on Ray Wenderlich's site. Matt Galloway actually wrote an article, and he talks about Swift being faster than Objective-C. And so you might actually think, I know we had this conversation a little bit before the show, and we were kind of like, well, how could that be possible? And I don't know all the details. The article goes into a lot more, but it talks about the way that Objective-C handled dynamic dispatch, and that the new Swift APIs don't have those same sort of bottlenecks, we'll just call them. And so if you're using pure Swift API kind of stuff, you might get some faster performance over Objective-C. But if you're still calling into Objective-C native stuff, then you're going to be doing whatever Objective-C native stuff was, right? So Apple has a transition that they'll have to go through before they get completely to the point where they're Swift, completely Swift. If that's their goal, is to become completely Swift. I don't know.
Well, and this makes complete sense. Anybody who's supported any languages or worked with anything for any length of time knows that we very quickly develop the older software that's out there to support how things used to be 3 years ago or 18 months ago or 10 years ago. And as you were saying, Objective-C has been around for 18 years. There's going to be holdovers on how things used to be done that couldn't be gotten rid of.
Yeah.
And now we've got a new language. They can jettison all the old stuff and go with the newer approaches.
Right. And yeah, you're right. I mean, that's one of the reasons why something like Swift or even C# was one of the Microsoft developed a whole brand new programming language based on lessons learned from previous experience. I mean, they brought in an experts to completely rethink the modern language, which was a term that Apple used during their presentations a lot, and so as someone going and talking to developers about iOS and why they might use Corona and things like that, when I went to the Austin iOS developers meetup, it was one of those things where I was like, well, maybe these guys are interested in Android, maybe they're not, I don't know. But what I did was I stood up there and I said, look, you can develop using Corona for iOS using Corona, and then you get all this other stuff for free, right? It's all like all this other stuff is available as well. And I even held up the Cintiq 13-inch companion with a game running on it, which looks like really absurd because it's like a huge tablet, but it was like the same game it runs on iOS runs here too. And it runs on this Nexus 7 and this iPad and this, it runs on all these devices. So, so that's one of the things I think is still a huge selling point for Corona. Now, if you're interested, I will say that if you're interested in checking out some Swift, getting into Swift, I think it's an admirable thing to do. I know I am still trying to teach myself a good bit of Objective-C because I want to build plugins for Corona. There are a number of tutorials and things out there, resources out there. So one of them is if you go to, let me pull up my thing here. If you go to the developer videos, you can check those out if you have a developer account. There is the WWDC developer videos. There's an introduction, an intermediate, and an advanced. There's also an interop with Objective-C talk, and these are all 50-minute talks, you know, so they go into some detail. And then there's a bunch of other advanced topics around Swift and Objective-C and those types of things, how those things work together. You can also get the WWDC app on iPhone and iPad, which is a great way to kind of take that with you if you're sitting in the doctor's office or waiting on kids at a recital or whatever. I don't know. You can you can watch these things. The other thing was, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. I keep moving my notes. Is that there is a bunch of people on YouTube who have started doing videos. I mean, right from day one, they just kind of jumped out there and started doing it because they knew people were going to be interested in it. And one of them is, his name's Benny Davidovitz. He's got 7 videos out there, and he goes into things like how to use parse with Swift. So he's basically, you know, because all these SDKs that are out there are kind of set up to work with Xcode and Objective-C, right? So how do you marry that with Swift? Well, he kind of takes a quick look at, okay, well, here's how you pull it into your project, and then here's how you access it from Swift, right? So you're kind of blending your interrupting your code together and stuff. So that was a good one, because most of the tutorials that are out there are kind of like, here's how you create a variable, here's how you create a constant, here's how you create a for loop, you know, which is fine. But at some point you go, well, how do I do something else besides those things with it, right? How does that translate? Like I said before, how does that translate out to using the Objective-C library or the API, the iOS API? You know, how do I do that? So I'll put a link in the show notes to that. And then there's also the Swift programming guide, which you can either get on iBooks, or they actually have the web version of it, and you can just sift through it and look at it in your browser of choice. All right, I think that's it. We're kind of running out of time. I wanted to talk about some of the things that Apple didn't talk about, but I think we'll save that for next time. So next time we're going to look at 6 things that Apple didn't tell you about that you probably need to know about as a developer, and they have things to do with how they're doing App Store integration, so that they're doing promotion of your apps. We talked a little bit before about how they're bundling their apps together, what that might mean for consumer perception, and things like that. So we'll look at all that next time and have a discussion around that. Do you guys got anything else before we head out?
Nope, sounds good.
All right. What you gonna spend your week on doing? It's summer, so what's the?
I'm writing.
You're writing.
I'm finishing up some textbooks and gonna finish up this advanced graphics chapter, and planning on adding the content from it to all of the Corona books that I've written. So if you've previously purchased beginning mobile app development or mobile app development with Corona, or learning mobile application and game development with Corona, you're going to get the advanced chapter. So, and that's not an additional cost. You can go ahead and get the upgrade as soon as it's available. I'll send an email out, so don't worry.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, and that has always, I don't know, anybody who's listening, that has always worked. There's always been like, you've given, the emails have gone out, I'm like, oh, cool, and I go over to the website and I get it, and it's, it's like, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Right?
That's right. And you get the new material. I've upgraded to Graphics 2.0. It's, you're continuing to get the latest information. Well, I'm usually a month or 2 behind Corona, so I got to learn the material too before I can write about it.
Right. Yeah.
It is. I'm trying to make it a current resource that is always current. So all you got to do is go to the website, do the book update, and you get the latest version. And the latest version was in February. So I'm working on a new one that'll have composer updates as well as the new Graphics 2.0 information.
Sweet. And eventually LiquidFun.
and LiquidFun.
All right. Well, there you go. BurtonsMediaGroup.com. Go check it out, and definitely get a book and get that continuous love going.
Yeah. And
All right,
I've also got several more games coming, so it's going to be a busy summer.
And yeah. I think with the LiquidFun, I wanna experiment with some things as well.
I got some ideas. I'm going to have to play with that.
Oh, very cool. All right. So I guess your alarm in the background wasn't too startling.
No. It's just getting a bit deaf now because it was quite loud, but no, it's nothing is on fire.
Well, we're glad you ended the show as the same way you began.
Next time I should just stay away and then leave you wandering for the week.
Oh, right, yeah.
Cliffhanger.
Join us next week when we figure out what happened.
Yeah. All right.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for being here. Be back here next Monday, noon Pacific, where we talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. Until then, have a great week and happy coding.
Bye.
Where's the mouse?